Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Sridhara Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Sridhara Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Bhagavatam. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Paravraj Jikacharya Stotara Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ISKCON founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki BBT founder Srila Prabhupada Ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Gauda Bhakti Vrinda Ki Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shama Kund Radha Kund Giri Govardhana Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Navadvip Dham Ki Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai Tulsi Devi Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Shri Radha Damodar Ki Jai Gita Nagari Dham Ki Jai Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai Sankirtan Yagya Ki Jai Tatai Gauda Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna, everyone. Hare Krishna. Good morning to you all. Thank you for being here. Yeah, and as Prabhuji said this morning, his name is Sir Paul. Is it Sir Paul?
Yes.
Sir Paul Puri. Thank you for being such exemplary Vaishnavas and all coming for morning program and class and doing so many things. So anyway, it's a great honor to be here with you. Although you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Can you hear us online? Anyone would like to? Okay. I think they're busy. Okay, so there isn't a board, and if you have your devices and you're logged in, then you can follow along. Sixth canto. Chapter is chapter 17, and this chapter is called Mother Parvati versus Chitraketu. And we're going to be reading text 29 today. So, yeah, let's see. We'll start with the invocation so you can all repeat. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, so reading from the sixth canto, chapter 17, Parvati curses Chitraketu, reading text 29. Do many of you have it on your phone? Password for the internet? I have my same one from the thing.
That's not working here.
I'm pretty sure it's working on mine. Oh, mine's GN guest is working here. Damaga? Someone's asking me to share it. I'm sharing it with you now. Mayank, you've got it now. Okay. So we're just going to read the Sanskrit and through and everything. Won't do repetition. Dehinam deha samyoga dwan. Yeah. So we won't do repetition. That means we won't repeat it. So we'll just read through and like that. Dehinam deha samyoga dvandvanishvara lilaya sugam dukam ritir janma shaponugraha evacha. The synonyms, you can repeat this. Dehinam, of all those who have accepted material bodies.
Those who have accepted material body.
Deha samyogat,
Deha samyoga.
because of contact with the material body.
Because of contact with the material body.
Dvandvani, dualities.
Duality.
Ishvara lilaya,
Ish.
by the supreme will of the Lord. Sukham, happiness. Dukam, distress. Mritihi, death. Janma, birth. Shapaha, curse. Anugraha, favor. Eva, certainly. Cha, and. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada.
Because of the actions of the Supreme Lord's eternal and external energy, the living entities are conditioned in contact with material bodies. The dualities of happiness and distress, birth and death, curses and favors are natural byproducts of this contact in the material world. In Bhagavad Gita, we find Maya Dhyakshena Prakriti Suyate Sachara Charam. The material world works under the direction of the goddess Durga, the material energy of the Lord. But she acts under the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is also confirmed in the Brahma Samhita 5.44. Shrishti Siti Pralaya Sadhana Shakti Eka Chayeva Yashya Bhuvanani Vihati Durga. Durga, the goddess Parvati, the wife of Lord Shiva, is extremely powerful. She can create, maintain, and annihilate any number of universes by her sweet will. But she acts under the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, not independently. Krishna is impartial, but because this is the material world of duality, such relative terms as happiness and distress, curses and favors are created by the will of the Supreme. Those who are not Narayana Para, pure devotees, must be disturbed by this duality of the material world, whereas devotees who are simply attached to the service of the Lord are not at all disturbed by it. For example, Haridas Thakur was beaten with a cane in 22 bazaars, but he was never disturbed. Instead, he smilingly tolerated the beating. Despite the disturbing dualities of the material world, devotees are not disturbed at all, because they fix their minds on the lotus feet of the Lord and concentrate on the holy name of the Lord. They do not feel the so-called pains and pleasures caused by the dualities of this material world.
Srila Prabhupada ki.
All right.
Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manodishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadavaya Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Gurun Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Sha Shri Rupam Sagvajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savaduttam Parijanasahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalitam Shri Nishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Sindhu Dinavantam Jagatpate Gopisha Pika Kanta Radha Kanta Sute Tapta Kanchana Gaura Kevati Vrindavaneshwari Shavana Sutene Hari Priya Vancha Kalpataruyascha Viva Sindhu Vyevacha Patiranam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama. So verse again, Dehi nam deha samyoga dvandvan ishvara lilaya sukam dukam mrityajanma shapo nugraha evacha. Because of the actions of the Supreme Lord's external energy, the living entities are conditioned in contact with material bodies. The dualities of happiness and distress, birth and death, curses and favors are natural byproducts of this contact in the material world. Anybody can relate to the translation of this verse? Anyone experiences material distresses, happiness? Yes. Curses? Anyone here has ever been cursed? Yeah. Anyone feel cursed? Anyone cursed anybody? Raise your hand, please. And yeah, curses and birth and death. Anyone here ever took birth? Yeah. Anyone here bound to die? Yeah. Anyone died before? Yeah, probably all of us. Okay. So, these are just natural byproducts of being in the material world. So, welcome to the material world. I often tell the story that the way that anyone remembers how you got welcomed into the material world, how did, that's right. Yes. Most people were welcomed by a doctor who smacked you on the backside and it made you cry. So that was the warm welcome into the material. A little bit different from what we were describing about the welcome Krishna gives you when you go back to the spiritual world, which is like Gopakumar, where he gives you a warm embrace and welcomes you home. And the material world is like, welcome to the material world. Your crying starts here. All right. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the pastime of King Chitraketu. Only a couple, so good. So we've been asked to give class today and tomorrow. Mayank said we want to get our money's worth, even though we're not being paid. But so we want to make sure if you're here with us that you give enough classes. So we stepped up. So the verses are very similar both days. So we're going to do today. Today is Chitraketu's pastimes. What happened? Okay. So tomorrow will be what's going to happen. Okay, so like that. So we'll look at the future tomorrow and today backwards. And we've created a little acronym for today, which is called backwards. But we're not going to get a meaning for each of those letters. We're just going to look at back. BACK is the acronym for today's talk. Everyone okay with that? So there will be a Kahoot at the end to test you all. So make sure you pay very close attention. Okay, so the B in backward stands for backstory. Backstory. Okay, so that's because we all have a backstory. Yes? Don't we all have a backstory? We all have history, at least in this life. And sometimes we come to a circumstance, and I'm sure all of you have experienced where somehow you have one of those days where you act in a certain way, and it's kind of maybe unbecoming, and you're maybe at work or you're with some friends or you're in school, whatever, and you realize that you really wish you hadn't acted like that, and people are kind of like, why are you acting like such a jerk? I'm sure none of you have ever acted like a jerk, but I get it all the time. So, and then I think, but you don't realize that I was woken up at 3 this morning by a crying baby. I was stuck in traffic for ages. There was no hot water. I didn't pay the electricity bill, so there was no electricity. And by the time I get to you, my life has been so tumultuous that you're lucky I didn't punch you in the nose, right? So there's always some backstory. The thing is, when we're interacting with people, we always want them to know our backstory. But unfortunately, when we're on the other side, very rarely do we care two figs about the backstory of anybody. Would you agree with that? Yeah.
Yes.
We have a tendency to want people to, what's the word? Yeah, respect or appreciate that, I may be having a tough time, but unfortunately, we don't always give the same credit. Yeah. So like that. So just quickly to run through. So the backstory for King Chitraketu is that he was a very, very pious king, and he had done a lot of service in so many different ways. And he had, anyone remembers how many queens he had? Something around the order of 10,000, as far as I recall. It was definitely more than 1,000. So he had a lot of queens. And he kept acquiring more queens because he wanted to have a son. And somehow none of these queens were producing a son for him. So, but of course, it probably was all their fault. It didn't have anything to do with him. But we're not going to talk about that. So anyway, after that, he had so many queens. Finally, he was visited by Narada Muni and Angira Muni, I think it was. Is it Angira Muni? Yes. And he's requesting from these saintly sadhus, please, 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 can you help me so that I can have a son? So they made an arrangement, and they said, you'll have a son, but his name will be, anyone remembers? Harsha Shoka. Not Sukha Dukkha, but kind of the same thing. Not Suki Duki, but similar thing. Harsha Shoka, which means Narada Muni said he will be the source of great happiness and the source of great lamentation. But interesting like that, he still said, no problem. I can endure whatever lamentation comes just for that little taste of happiness. Like, the story, I won't get into it, of the drop of honey coming from the hive and the person's hanging on the tree and the scorpion's coming and it's about to break and there's so much, but just for that little drop of honey, I will undergo so much torment. So he said yes. Anyway, the child was born, and what happened after the child was born? Yes, he didn't die, but he was murdered. So it was born to his wife Kritaduti, and then the co-wives conspired because they were all envious of the fact she had provided the king with a son, and so they killed the child. And then he was very happy, then he became very sad. So like that, then he called back the sages came, and they said, anyway, there's no need for you to cry, it was destined to happen. They brought back to life the child, and the child told him the story of why he had come. And he said, in my past life, I was actually your enemy, and you defeated me. So now I've taken birth here just to cause you distress. So I got mine back and now you can suffer and I win, kind of thing. So he was like completely bewildered, but he realized that actually in this world there's always going to be some happiness and some distress. He became, from that experience, he became quite devout. He took initiation from Narada Muni. Narada Muni gave him a mantra. By chanting this mantra after a few days, he became the king of Vidyadhara. So he became the king of Vidyadhara. So much opulence, material opulence came by chanting, spiritual mantra, which also happens. Then, after chanting for 1 week only, he got the direct darshan of Lord Sankarshan. So the Lord appeared before him directly and blessed him. His life was perfected by the appearance of the Lord, and the Lord blessed him that he would achieve perfection in this life. He got the direct darshan. His life was perfected. And then he's flying around on this aerial mansion with all of the Vidyadharas, enjoying with all of his queens and everyone in a perfected state. Now, different acharyas say different thing. He was at least on the level of bhava. Some say he had actually had attained prema. So like this, he was in a perfected state because he had had darshan of the Lord and the Lord had blessed him to attain perfection. Then as he's flying along in his aerial mansion, they went to uh, the Mandara Mountains, I think, like that. And anyway, he saw Lord Shiva giving a class, a brahmachari class to all the saints and the sadhus and his wife. We were going to do this today, but we decided, oh, that'd be so good. His wife was sitting on his lap. Come on, honey. Come on. Sitting on my lap. Saw him around, and no, probably wasn't quite like that. But anyway, she was, and I have to be very careful actually. She was sitting on his lap in the middle of this assembly of sadhus, and King Chitraketu laughed, and he laughed loudly. Now, King Chitraketu, Prabhupada describes that he didn't laugh because he thought, isn't that silly? Isn't that funny? He's such a, fool. Why is he doing? He laughed because he thought only Lord Shiva is so exalted that he could sit in the assembly of sadhus with his wife on his lap and not even be disturbed. But the difficulty was that sometimes when you laugh, not everyone laughs with you. And so Parvati heard him laugh. Now, Lord Shiva heard the laugh. The sadhus also heard the laugh, but Lord Shiva, he just remained silent. And because he remained silent, all the sadhus also remained silent. But Parvati, she had other thoughts. She didn't appreciate it. So, like that, this is the backstory.
So, in the Prabhupada's, there's a line in the Prabhupada says, those who are not Narayana Para, pure devotees, must be disturbed by this duality of the material world, whereas devotees who are simply attached to the service of the Lord are not at all disturbed by it. So in terms of the acronym, the next letter in back being A be put for attached to service. So backstory and then attached to service. So Prabhupada, just this point that I read out, Prabhupada is saying that devotees are simply attached to the Lord's service and they're not disturbed. So first of all, I was thinking the lesson was we should remain focused. But on what? What should we remain focused? Krishna would be the obvious answer. And I was also thinking, however, somehow we should remain focused on the why. Why did I join Krishna consciousness? Why did I come here? What attracted me to take this process seriously? And remain focused on that. And it's actually a good test as well for us to see in terms of our progress. Are we increasing our focus on Krishna as we go down the lane, as it were, of Krishna consciousness? Does the focus become sharper, or is it starting to blur a little? If we're attached to the service of the Lord, as Prabhupada says here, then we will remain focused on Krishna. Now, one question could be, because Prabhupada says in this purport that we will not be disturbed if we remain focused on the service. I mean, is that true? Is that really true? I mean, do we ever experience any disturbance in the association of devotees? Let's be honest. Sometimes they're quite most disturbing, actually. It's like, and so I was trying to unpack that, what Prabhupada is saying, and I was thinking, Prabhupada is saying to remain attached to the service, but not to be attached to the goal, or should I say the fruits, as it were, of the service. So it's very easy, for example, to feel this is my service. I do this. But what is it you're doing? So I might be, for example, making garlands. And I'm thinking, and someone else may come in, visitors or otherwise, or someone put someone else on the schedule, and I get disturbed. I make Krishna's garland every Tuesday. Why are you putting someone else? Or someone else may just come and say, Mataji, can I add these little frills or these little, I don't know, some other flowers? And you think, no. So that isn't the attachment that Prabhupada is saying here, because that's causing me disturbance. So something has gone disarray in my so-called attachment to the service. If I'm attached to making, just using this example, if I'm attached to making Krishna's garland, I should be attached that when these doors open, everyone's going to be thinking how beautiful Krishna looks because of the dash, not how beautiful Krishna looks because of the garland I made. That's a different attachment. Does that make sense? So when we say attachment to the service, it shouldn't be causing me distress or disturbance, or also importantly, those devotees around me should not be becoming disturbed or distressed because of my attachment. So it's really, and I was remembering, do you remember we were at old Vrindavan just a few days ago, and Vishanu Maharaj was giving the example. Someone asked a question, how did you do all those austerities? How did you get together and build the palace of gold and develop New Vrindavan? And Vashanu Maharaj said, we accomplished all these things because there was real camaraderie between the devotees. Because there was the common goal was to please Prabhupada. The common goal was to put up the palace of gold and do this and that because we want to please Prabhupada. So we all had a sense of teamwork, you could say, for the common goal. It wasn't like, I'm going to build that. And if anyone did think that, without going into the history, other things may have occurred for them, just obstacles. And also, the Pandavas is a good example of 5 brothers, but they all worked together. Yudhishthira was the head, he was the king, and then the 5 brothers knew their places and they had different roles within that, but they moved as one unit. And they were very close, they were very tight because they had a common goal. And it wasn't that Bhima was thinking, well, why does Yudhishthira always get the praise? Or Arjuna is thinking, I'm the famous Arjuna. Maybe I should go forward. But they all work together. So in that sense, yes, as Prabhupada says, we should be attached to the service, but attached to the end goal of that service. And how can we all therefore work together? But if I get attached to the service, because it's my service, this will not allow us to be undisturbed, as Prabhupada says.
Okay, so the next letter is C. And what is the acronym? Backwards. So we're having a backwards look kind of thing. So C stands for criticism. Criticism. I have a very powerful criticism for every person in this room. Just kidding. So there are great dangers with criticism. And this is shown from this pastime, which is very amazing, actually. So much we can unpack from this pastime. King Chitraketu was critical of a situation. And the purport, sometimes it's a little difficult to understand. In fact, actually, Prabhupada begins one of the purports by saying, I think he says, like a normal person will not be able to understand the intricacies of this pastime. And because it requires us to be on a different platform. So in one sense, you could say, um, it may look a little silly for Lord Shiva to have his wife sitting on his lap when he's hanging out with the sadhus, right? I see a few people are nodding like, yeah, of course, that seems a little unusual. The difficulty is that we have to remember that for persons who are on extremely elevated platforms, they're not actually obliged to conduct themselves according to the rules and regulations that everybody else does. I was thinking how the sixth canto is almost a little bit of not exactly a repetition, but it's very similar to the fourth canto, because you have Daksha reappearing in the sixth canto. And if you remember Daksha from the fourth canto, it opens with him coming into the assembly and Lord Shiva not standing up. And because Lord Shiva didn't stand up, then he decided that the beginning of his talk would be about how his son-in-law has a face like a baboon, and how he's the king of the Bhutas, and he's all this, he's just basically so disgraceful. And he has no respect for his father-in-law, because he should have stood up. And in that situation, Lord Shiva did pretty much the same thing. He just was silent, and then he eventually kind of left the arena. But what ensued was that, with all due respect, all Hades broke out. All heck broke out, and it just put the whole community. It wasn't like it was just between these two people. The entire community was affected by this critical mentality, which resulted in Vaishnava Aparad. So here in the sixth canto, again, Daksha has returned. This time he's in a different form, and he has something like 10,000 sons, and someone comes and preaches to his sons, and just like we're all on the side preaching to Keshav. Keshav, you're going to be a brahmachari, you're going to be a sannyasi, like Keshav Maharaj. You're going to, and we're all preaching, and Shilin might get a little upset. Why are you preaching my son? I want him to be like a successful lawyer or something like that. I'm going to send him to school. So anyway, Daksha became very upset because Narada Muni preached to all these guys and made them all renunciants. So he kind of let it go the first time. Then he had another, 10,000 sons. He preached to them too. And then he said, that's it, I curse you. And if you remember, Daksha again gets into the cursing mood. This canto is filled with lots of kind of cursing. So from actually great persons have a tendency sometimes to curse one another. So he curses him, and then anyone remembers what was the curse of Narada Muni? How he cursed Narada Muni? Yes, you won't be able to stay in one place. And then Srila Prabhupada remarks in the purport that it was a blessing. And he also says it's kind of same thing for him. He's always having to travel around also. So like this, Narada Muni was kind of like, okay, whatever, I won't stay in one place. I'll just get to keep moving. Rolling stone gathers no moss, as they say. So anyway, so like this. So Prabhupada says it's difficult to understand. At the beginning, Prabhupada says that King Chitraketu had no intention of being critical of Lord Shiva. Actually, his laugh was out of a space of respect and awe and reverence. But it wasn't really the correct thing to do. And sometimes it's easy to be uncontrolled. There's a pastime, I think it's Sanatan Goswami is walking down the street, and while he's walking, he's meditating on Radha Krishna Leela. And while meditating on, or no, it wasn't Sanatan, I think it was Rupa. And while he was meditating on Radha Krishna Leela, he was picturing this scene where Krishna is pulling down a branch of a tree and Radharani's reaching, and it goes up and he pulls it down, and he started laughing because he found it humorous. But when he laughed, it just so happened that on the other side of the street was this Brahmana who had a bit of a limp and had some, physical altercation. And he thought Rupa Goswami was laughing at him. And therefore he became unhappy, and he kind of in his mind cursed Rupa Goswami. And immediately Rupa Goswami's meditation broke. And he was like, what's going on here? So he went to Sanatan and he explained, you must have offended someone. And Rupa's like, offended someone? What have I been doing? I've been walking around meditating on Radha Krishna Leela. And And then he said, no, you have a program and you invite all the brahmanas, and whoever doesn't come, whoever doesn't show up at your program, they're the person that you must have offended. So he did that. Anyway, it turns out that this Brahmin was upset and offended because he thought that Rupa Goswami was laughing at him. So this becomes like very, very difficult. And we think, what do we do? Hide in a box and not do anything? We can't laugh. We can't, joke. We can't kid around. We can't, because someone's going to get upset and offended. So anyway, the point being that actually in this situation, and as one senior devotee said to me once, you can't offer obeisances enough. So there's no harm in going to someone and apologizing and saying, please forgive me if I committed any offense, if anything that I said upset and offended you. Because actually, as Bhagavad Gita explains, every endeavor is covered by some fault, which means we're actually always making mistakes. But to learn from our mistakes and to go back and try to see if I did commit some offense. Sometimes it may be unknowingly. Just like at the end of performing, if you do deity worship, at the end of doing your deity worship, you beg for forgiveness for any offenses you may have created. Why do you think we do that? Yeah, because we probably committed some offense, knowingly or unknowingly, and that's part of it. Whether I knew that I did it, or sometimes we skip a little bit just because we're behind time, or we get caught up in something, or maybe we did one thing in different order, and it's just like, oh my God. And sometimes we may think we did everything perfect, and that's when we really need to pray. That's the time when we think I did everything perfect. There's no need for me to apologize to the Lord in case I did something wrong. Because likely just by us sitting down to worship the Lord, we already committed some mistake. We've already committed some offense. So the point being that actually we have to be very careful of being critical and criticizing others and acting in a way that may not be our position or our place. Sometimes it may be our position or place. It may be our role that we actually have to point out something that's wrong. Say you're the head pujari and you see that someone's doing something incorrect. You can't say, oh, I can't criticize. I can't say anything because, I'll be an offender. Meanwhile, I'll let the Lord continue to get served half of the offering that he's meant to get served, or some, old garlands, or some, not using tulsi, whatever it might be. So actually, we may have a position where we have to do it. But as we discussed before, it's not just that you do it, it's how you do it. It's the way that we go about doing that. So sometimes it can be offered with sweet words. In secular society, they have this saying that you can give a feedback sandwich. And it forces us to think twice about positive and only once about something that may appear negative or need to be improved. So we can start by saying, my dear Prabhu, the fact that you show up every day and do amazing service, you're so dedicated to serving their lordships, you've made this commitment. I fall at your feet, I offer you obeisances. I just wish that when you showed up, you would be on time, because we actually are meant to start at 4:30 and you get here every day at 4:35, and that makes the whole program late. But otherwise, there's not anything else that I can fault. The way that you offer the arti, I can see you have so much love and devotion in your heart, but please, Prabhu, if you could be on time, that would make a big difference. Does that make a little bit of sense? So at least we can try to sandwich the feedback in the middle of some tasty bread, So,
So the final letter K in Bhat is for Krishna factor. Not like the X factor, but Krishna factor. So in this verses leading up to this verse that we were speaking on, Chitraketu was able to see Krishna's hand in the situation. And we understand that he was able to see Krishna's hand because in the way he responded. And it's really telling in one sense how much we're absorbing, absorbing, and like actually not just speaking the philosophy, but actually taking it in terms of how we react when a testing situation occurs. And sometimes we can even feel a bit embarrassed. We think, why did I snap like that? Why did I say like that? But it's okay. It's like we can just take stock of, okay, this is where I need to maybe work on this, or I know become purified. And so the strength that Chitraketu had because of his focus on Krishna was to be able to walk away. And not just walk away, because that can also be passive aggressive, like just going to walk. I'm just going to walk out the temple. No, he was actually able to be together so much with his mind and senses that he actually was respectful towards Parvati and Lord Shiva, and said some very kind, like positive, kind, philosophical words. And then he walked away. And it really shows a strength of character. And it reminds me of one time I remember when I was constantly overly oversharing with my friend because someone was really disturbing me, so getting on my nerves. And I was overly sharing about this person, this devotee. And my friend just kept listening and listening and listening. And eventually she turned around and she said, where is Krishna in all this? And it felt like she just like slept to wake me up, and I thought, whoa, yeah, what am I doing? And I appreciate that she injected that simple like, yeah, where's the Krishna factor in all? What are you saying? What are you doing? So a good lesson, therefore, for us is sometimes to just pause and ask ourselves in testing situations, like, what is it that Krishna wants us to learn? What am I so as take away the need to react to someone else, but to just turn it on ourselves. Okay, what am I supposed to get out of this? For example, when it's like things are going well, or you could say calm seas, as it were, Krishna, who is our anchor in life, he's there. But when the sea gets a bit rough, we tend to pull up that anchor. That might be the time when we actually put it down. That's the time when we actually remember Krishna. But we tend to pull up the Krishna anchor first and go on by ourselves on this rough sea and wonder why we're disturbed and suffering. And we tend to feel, therefore, disconnected, even though we remove the Krishna anchor, as it were, but we feel disconnected. And as Prabhupada explains, Krishna's in your heart and you can never get rid of him anyway. But if you want to, he follows you everywhere. But sometimes we just lose that connection with Krishna in terms of how I used to relate to him. What does that mean? It means in terms of I used to serve like this, but I can't do it anymore because of this happened or that, or situation. Maybe we had to move, or maybe this occurred. Someone left me, or so we just, in times of difficulties or hardship, just like Chitraketu, we just need to see how can I reconnect with Krishna. It may not be the same way that I was doing it, but it doesn't mean we lose hope because Krishna's always there. He's just waiting for you to plug in again in another way. Like we were saying in our workshops in New Vrindavan, when there's obstacles, what do you do? When we were driving here, for example, our coach driver was finding some difficulty to come on these roads. But what did he do? He didn't say, that's it, we're done. We're just going to set up camp here and live here for the rest of our life on the windy road. He had to figure out using the sat nav, I go like this, I go like that, and I need to overcome these obstacles, that's what we should do. And it's interesting, Satsut Maharaj, who we heard about yesterday and has a connection here, he says, chanting is not a luxury for a devotee, neither is hearing about Krishna. Hearing and chanting are how we sustain our spiritual lives. So Maharaj is basically saying that don't throw away the anchor of Krishna. When we have these tests, or whether it's on the magnitude of what happened to Chitraketu or otherwise, somehow we have to try to remain connected or change that connection. Like just the same way everyone's like thinking, I can't use my phone when you're normally at home. There's no problem. We have connection. So here you don't have your home Wi-Fi or the broadband or whatever. So somehow we have to say, okay, what is it? What do I connect to? We just have to do that with Krishna when there's testing time. We just have to find how can I reconnect with him and on what level? Because he's not God. He's not God. We have to just see that Krishna Pita.
Okay, so that there's lots more that can be said, but we have a limited time, and we want to open it up for some questions and answers or reflections. So, just in conclusion, today is Chitriketu's pastimes, kind of what happened. B was for, and the acronym was backwards, starting with just back. So B stood for backstory. And why is it about what's the backstory? There's always a backstory. We all have a backstory. Yes. So we should try not to only expect people to want to hear our backstory, but we should also try to figure out what is everybody else's backstory. And then A stood for attachment to service. And huh?
So just, you know, because I experienced this now. I go to the other from me among children and already do the God and do my business. No. We do it ourselves. You know, that kind of thing. Okay, fine, you know, that's a bit not nice.
Yes. So we should be attached to the service, but not just the service itself, but the mood in which we do the service and the goal of the service. Otherwise, we will be disturbed. We're going to come to questions just one second. And then C was for criticism. So we have to be very careful. Inadvertently, we can criticize, but criticism can be the cause of immense upset within our own lives, and within entire communities can be damaged just by being overly critical. And then K stood for the Krishna factor, that we have to always see Krishna's hand. He's always in there. Anyway, there isn't anything that's separated from him. So like that. Okay, and you had a question?
Yeah, when it's a bit more, when we say attachment to the service. So let's say somebody comes to us and say like, oh, I'm going to do this on the service. So then you know that they're not ready for that service and you don't want to say no. So instead of saying no for that particular service, you give them some other service which you know that they're ready to. Is that okay?
Did everyone hear the question? Okay. So what Mayampuru said is that sometimes if you have a position of responsibility, people might come to you and say, oh, I really want to do this service. But you know that they're not really ready to do that service. But you think there's another service that needs to be done that they could do that really nicely. And so you encourage them to do this other service. But what they really wanted to do was X, Y, and Z. And then he finished by asking the question, is that okay? So is that right? Did I get that? So did you want to? So yes and no. Yes and no. In one sense, yes, because sometimes we could be in a position where Krishna is inspiring us from within, and we can see that this person is maybe over enthusiastic for something that they're not quite ready for. But they could really excel in another area. And if you have the relationship with that person to be able to direct them and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense, and they can get on board with it, then you can guide them in that way. Sometimes we can just let someone try something, even though we think, because see, this is also a danger. The danger is that we think we know best. And the thing that I found over a number of years is sometimes I do, and a lot of times I don't. And sometimes you just have to let people try something and get on with it and let them fail and see that it wasn't right for them, or let them succeed and you have the revelation that I was a fool. And it's not always so easy to know which is the right time for which thing either. So we often discuss that, or at least, just with, yeah, anyway, like that. I think that's a kind of a simple answer. It's not definitive, but it means that and Prabhupada, how often did Srila Prabhupada imagine, imagine if someone, I don't know who like the big stars are of the day, but imagine some young devotee comes up and you're like the president of the temple or you're like whatever, and they say, we're going to go and meet whoever is the most famous stars, like Shamsundar said, we want to go to London and meet the Beatles. And Prabhupada was like, very good, yes, very good. But Prabhupada didn't say, all blessings go. He spoke to Mukunda Maharaj and he said, what do you think about this idea? He's like, you know, you know, I know you, Mukunda, from New York. Now we're in San Francisco and he's, Shyam Sundar's done this and done that. But what do you think of this idea? And Mukunda was like, I don't know. He knows so many people. He's kind of got a lot of enthusiasm and maybe he could make it happen. And so Prabhupada went, okay, why not try? And then later, Shyam Sundar writes a book called Chasing Rhinos with the Swami,
Yeah.
where he talks about the fact that he was perpetually chasing rhinos, going for things that were way outside of his remit. And why chasing rhinos? He says, because if you don't catch the rhino, then everyone will say anyway you were going after a rhino. But if you do get the rhino, then everyone will be like, wow, you went for the rhino and you got it. So sometimes we may need to let people fail on their own accord and have their own realization. This is also a thing, many of you are probably parents, but one parent once said to me, because I'm not a parent, but I was with one of my little nephews and I was watching them and I kept saying to them, look, they're going over there. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. And they said, you are a helicopter parent. And I said, what the heck is a helicopter parent? And they say, you're like this. Bub, 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 bub. You just hover over top of the child, waiting to stop anything. And then she said, let them eat dirt. Let them play in the toilet. Let them do this. They're going to, they'll eat dirt and they'll get healthy from eating the dirt. Just let them make mistakes. Let them fall over. Let them get up. And I was like, but. And they're like, you can't stop them from experiencing difficulties in the world. But you have a good heart trying, but whether you're watching or not watching is going to happen. So it's kind of like that. Sometimes we can be overtly controlling, and other people are just waiting for the opportunity and to feel like someone believes in them. And then they take it up and they excel, and you're like, whoa, maybe this fanning spark thing actually works. Maybe sometimes it doesn't. But anyway, what's the harm in trying? But if you actually really see something is a problem and you want, then it's okay to speak to them, but don't be surprised if people sometimes get upset. Something like that. Does that answer your question? Yes, sir. His question was that sometimes people want to do a service that you feel they may not be qualified for, and you think there's another service that they are qualified for, so you encourage them to do that service. And is that okay? Yeah. Okay, we have 2 minutes, and Mother Vishali had her hand raised. Criticism. You have some for us?
This episode happens again and again and again. How do we do this?
You're talking about in your personal life?
Criticism you brought in. Yes.
Yes.
But it keeps on happening.
Okay, gotcha. So if I'm understanding correctly, hypothetically, you're the head pujari, person is late, always late, and you try to have a feedback sandwich conversation with them. They're still late. Then you think, what do I do? Where's the point where I kind of say, well, I think that if you have a position of responsibility, there's a point at which you can say, I've really tried in a humble way to encourage you to be on time. Punctuality and cleanliness are paramount when it comes to, to deity worship. And until you can learn that maybe this service isn't for you, it might upset you, but I'll give you one more try. If you show up on time, then we're good to go. And if not, then with all due respect, we'll have to find someone else. Now, often in ISKCON, we don't have the luxury of saying we'll get someone else to do the service for you. It's not like you can, go to Shilin and get him to recruit you a few more pujaris or something. That's like, I wish it was like that. but unfortunately it's not. So sometimes you just have to somehow continue to tolerate and continue to encourage. Um, Mahaduri Maharaj used to have this thing about people putting their shoes on the shelf, right? It's a classic. Any ISKCON temple you go to, it's not just in London. Wherever they go right up to the door that you're going to have to open and flip their shoes right off and then just walk in. Meanwhile, there's a beautiful shelf someone has created for you to put your shoes on so that I don't have to walk over your shoes or step over them or trip or whatever. But devotees just like, no matter how many times, every Mangalarti, it was like all the beautiful announcements. And then, can you all, and this was all the residents, can you please put your shoes on the shelf? After like 5 years, I was like, Prabhu, I don't think anyone is ever going to put their shoe on it. Maybe we should tear the shelves down and just put something else there. And he was like, no, we have to keep telling them. So it depends on where you're at. But ultimately, the ideal of being able to say that, no, the time has come, you're not listening, then we can't have you doing this anymore. Personally, I think that that is an okay thing to do if someone is not willing to come up to a certain standard, but we don't always have the luxury of being able to do that. Hare Krishna. And I think we should finish now. The curtains are going to open. Thank you all very much. Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Grantara Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Namo Vishnupadaya Vishnupadaya Vedanta Swami
Srimad Bhagavatam Ishagade Kirtan Shishi Tagosam Kirtan Vinam Sikitar Kirtan Kirtan Nagari Nam Kirtan Hare Krishna, everyone. So, this concludes the morning program. And now, for the moment you've all been waiting for, we're going to a breakfast prasad. Anyway, if this occasion didn't have enough meals yesterday, we can start the day together. So, breakfast is, from what I understand, at 9, and it will be in the buffet area. What's it called? The farm buffet? Farm buffet area. So that's just a short walk, so you can build up your appetite after the ecstatic kirtan. Thank you, everyone, for leaving, and also thank you, Avni, for leading us that beautiful kirtan. And after prasadam, there'll be a short window of respite, before the loft area, farm loft. Sunset. Oh, that's right, because there's a sunset or sunrise. Sunset. Okay, sunset loft. We'll be in the sunset loft, and we'll be doing kung fu. You'll be doing some sharp lounge. Bhakti, final with the material. So everyone can be there for 11, and I think that's it. Is that all the announcements, Guru? Oh, that's okay. So we can all get ourselves ready and get everything together for this. Hare Krishna. Phil Prabhupada Ki Jai.